long delay. Even though we had a fail-safe, that seemed not to work either, so once again I apologize. We're delighted to have James Reid here this evening. James is a painter, teaches at the Art Students League and the New York Academy and FIT. He recently completed an essay on the photographs of Christopher Burkett in a monograph entitled Intimations of Paradise, and he's currently writing a book entitled The Life of Form in Painting. I know it's a topic that we're all looking forward to hearing about, so let's welcome James Reid, please.
Hello, everyone. I have to be able to remove this microphone and walk around with it. Can I just pull it out of here?
I don't know how much space you'll have.
The wire is long enough.
Right on the screen.
Maybe we need to
And also, I need a laser pointer. Someone was going to bring that.
You have to hold it right up to your... hold it right.
You need more?
I need a little more, yeah, a little more slack. And which determines the quality, the strength of the art. Every great artist is original in the sense that the art draws its strength from direct contact with nature. And in Matisse's case, with nature at her deepest level, where one drinks from the very wellspring of being, of existence. This is what Matisse was talking about when he said that in order to be an artist, one must put aside one's prejudices of vision, one's prejudicial habits of vision, and learn to look at life with the eyes of a child, drawing one's strength from the existence of objects. Matisse was already traveling in a certain direction before he went to Russia at the invitation of the collector, Sergei Shukhin. And it was because he was traveling on a path that converged with the icons that he was so impressed with them. He was very strongly impressed by the icons because he was traveling on a path that converged with them. May I have the first slides, please, on both sides? Matisse arrived in Moscow on October 23rd in 1911. The next day, he visited Ilya Ostrukov, who's a painter and collector and the patron of the Tretyakov Gallery. Matisse had met him some time before in Paris. And immediately, he asked to be shown Ostrukov's collection of Russian icons. A day later, Ostrukov recounted the incident. Quote, "Yesterday evening, he visited us, and you should have seen his delight at the icons. Literally, the whole evening, he wouldn't leave them alone, relishing and delighting in each one, and with what finesse. At length he declared that for the icons alone, it would have been worth his while coming from a city even farther away than Paris, that the icons were now nobler for him than Fra Beato. Today, Shukhin phoned me to say that Matisse literally could not sleep the whole night because of the acuity of his impression." I wonder if that was the beginning of Matisse's lifelong trouble with insomnia. From that moment on, writes Pierre Schneider, Matisse spent all his time going around to visit churches, convents, and collections of sacred images, his excitement at the first encounter not having diminished one iota. He shared it with all who came to interview him during his stay in Moscow. On October 31st, Ostrukov wrote to D.J. Tolstoy, the curator of the Hermitage, saying, "Matisse is here. He is deeply affected by the art of the icons. He seems overwhelmed and is spending his days with me frantically visiting monasteries, churches, and private collections." This icon, painted by the 15th century master Andrei Rublev, is one of the most famous of Russian icons, one of the most celebrated. And it's not in very great condition of preservation, but the glory of it still shines through. Look at the placement of the furniture here, moving back here, and then the opening up of the shape of the table in the middle. And see how the figures of these two angels relate to the oblique placement of this furniture, in that they participate in that obliqueness, but then they turn somewhat against it and lean in. And this angel here leans in, inclines his head more than this angel. And so we have this counterclockwise movement around this way. Notice that the movement of this angel's head inclining in is picked up by this one, leaning over like that. And when we look at this detail over on this side of the central angel, see how look at the confluence of tone from the wing coming into the shoulder band. And the shoulder band moves in like this, and then has a rather abrupt change in direction. It moves in, and it drops down. And just at the point where it drops down like that, we get this reaction of the zigzagging of the neckline. See, as that drops down, that pulls up simultaneously, comes down, and then zips over in that direction to pull our eye back to that wing. And this plummeting of the shoulder band leads us into the great billowing form of this dark sleeve here, and then the gentle movement into those blessing fingers. Now, I pointed out this against that, and that is so crucial for opening up the space of the front plane of this angel, because it gives a movement back into that wing, as opposed to this. It really expands the space outward, and that provides the space then, sets the space, opens up the space for this arm to come down and that hand to go out, holding that staff. And notice as well that we're in opposition to this wing's confluence, pulling our eye around to the front. This wing here pushes against this the oak tree back here, just kind of nudges it a little bit, so we have this little concavity or convexity in the tree, and then the upper part of the tree here pushes against the halo, and we get this turning then of the halo with the head in space. And icons are never conceived statically. There's always a sense of movement in them, and of movement against the plane, in relationship to the plane. You see, it's very characteristic of icons to have an over-volumed head like this, where the head turns on its central axis, tilts. But the movement is evident then in the preservation of the circular form for the upper head. And that's what accounts for this apparent, what people call distortion in the icons. They are really great art, Matisse excitedly told an interviewer in Moscow. I am in love with their moving simplicity, which to me is closer and dearer than Fra Angelico. In these icons, the soul of the artist who painted them opens out like a mystical flower, and from them we ought to learn how to understand art. What is one to make of this expression of heartfelt admiration for the old Russian icons? From the icons we ought to learn how to understand art? That sounds exaggerated. But Matisse was habitually reserved in his statements and cautious and not prone to exaggeration. Our endeavor this evening might be defined as an investigation into the meaning and the validity of this statement. From them, we ought to learn how to understand art. Not one particular kind of art, mind you, but art in itself. The icons offered Matisse a revelation of what art is on some level. This goes deeper than stylistic influence. To speak of Matisse imitating or being influenced by the icons is to miss the point. His relationship with them is on a deeper level. In them, he has recognized in an especially pure form the essence of art, in a way that was going to be very important for him throughout his career. We know that before and after his trip to Moscow, Matisse was enthusiastic about different various kinds of art which were known at the time as primitive arts, such as Japanese prints, Persian miniatures, African sculptures. But the icons held a special importance for him for two reasons. The first of the two reasons was articulated by Matisse in several interviews which he held in Moscow. On October 27th, for example, he praised the monumentality and the majesty of the Kremlin churches, and the reporter added, "The pure, rich colors of the old icons, their sincerity and immediacy, seemed a genuine discovery to him." Then he quotes Matisse. "This is primitive art. This is authentic popular art. Here is the primary source of all artistic endeavor. The modern artist should derive his inspiration from these primitives." Matisse confided to another interviewer, "The icons are a supremely interesting example of primitive painting. Such a wealth of pure color, such spontaneity of expression, I have never seen anywhere else. This is Moscow's finest heritage. People should come here to study, for one should seek inspiration from the primitives. An understanding of color, simplicity, it's all in the primitives. It is the best thing Moscow has to offer. One should come here to learn because one should seek inspiration from the primitives." Matisse linked the primitive quality of the icons with their authentic popularity. That is to say, this art was understood popularly. It worked. In Matisse's view, art is not to isolate itself in the museums, but is to participate in our life. Decades later, in a letter to Sister Jacques-Marie regarding the Chapelle du Rosaire at Vence, Matisse wrote, "I would like it to be useful. Do you think it could be useful?" Now, what on earth did Matisse mean about art working and being useful? This question brings us to one of the key connections between Matisse and the Russian iconographers. In his conception, and in theirs, the role of art is therapeutic. It seeks to relieve, to alleviate, to heal. How it does this, we will discuss a little bit further on, but for the time being, let me simply say that the instrument of this healing is light. And in this connection, I'd like to quote Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer writes, "Light is the most delightful of all things. It is the symbol of everything that is good, everything that heals. In all the religions of the world, it symbolizes eternal salvation." And of course, the word salvation literally means healing. Salus is health. The connection isn't obvious in English as it is in other languages. The icons held a special importance from Matisse because they are an art whose specific function is to heal whoever contemplates them by means of light, and this use is truly popular, understood by all the faithful who approach the icons. Before this hour is passed, we shall look into the nature of pictorial light, color, and space, and then we shall see what this light has to do with healing. But before we get to that, we can surmise a second reason why the icons were especially important to Matisse. Whereas Persian miniatures and Japanese prints were foreign to the West, icons were part of the heritage of Western Europe until the late Middle Ages, in Romanesque and early Gothic painting and sculpture. The whole of Western medieval art developed in direct or indirect dependency on Byzantium, and there was a rich exchange of formal ideas between East and West throughout the Middle Ages. Furthermore, the art of the great Phoenicians, Titian, Veronese, Tintoretto, has roots in Byzantine iconographic art, the influence coming by way of Crete. The Venetian legacy, with its Byzantine formal roots, was in turn widespread in Western Europe, coming to Matisse via Chardin, Courbet, and Cézanne, among others. So thus, while the icons were, like other Eastern painting, impressively and revealingly different from the art of the museums, they were nevertheless a significant part of the family tree of Western art. This peculiar balance must have been especially stirring to the sensibilities of Matisse, who had spent quite a bit of time in his youth studying and copying the Western masterworks in the Louvre. May I have the next slide on the left, please? One often hears it said that Matisse's late paintings and cutouts, and also the Russian icons, and for that matter, Japanese prints and Persian miniatures as well, are flat. Now, such a statement can be either mistaken or ambiguous, depending upon the understanding and intention of the speaker. If the intended meaning of the word flat may simply be unmodeled. Indeed, the modeling or shading of volumes in these works is usually quite slight and is sometimes suppressed altogether. They are executed largely in line and flat tone, but that does not at all diminish their volume. They have a great plenitude of volume. Volume is expressed in better ways. As Matisse explained to a visitor to his studio at the time when he was working on the Barnes mural, this visitor remarked upon the volumetric quality of the figures in the mural, and Matisse said, "Yes, but in reality, the painting is made in flat tones, without any gradation. It is the drawing and the harmony and contrast of the colors that form the volume. Just as in music, a number of notes form a harmony more or less rich and profound, according to the talent of the musician who has assembled them. So let us not say that these pictures are flat, even if we only mean to refer to the flatness of the tones, because the paintings are emphatically not flat." Look at this painting which Matisse made in 1946, in which he has this area of blue here in the foreground table. And then he has this blue area in the upper right, and it pulls back in the space. And by pulling back like that, it opens up the interior of the room. And look at the edge of the table here, how it swings back like that, really swoops the eye back into space, and dramatizes the distance between this blue up here and that blue up there. And look at these volumes here, which are the legs of the table, and how this one how it relates to the contour, the vertical edge of the contour of the table here, which is going back in perspective. But see how it relates to that, kind of rises up. At the same time, it is indeed the legs of the table. And then we have these objects on top of the table. There's the melons whooping around like that, and there's this great vase up here. And look at the drawing of the vase. It's not exactly symmetrical. This side descends, and we get a heavier or darker line coming up on this side, and then pushing over to the left. So that the vase would seem then to lean over that way, but it's buttressed here by the wine goblet and by the white napkin here. The contrast there and the direction of the drawing, buttressing it. And the fullness of the volume is expressed by the dynamism of the variations in the contour and by the precise registering of tones between the kind of the orange ochre back here and the lighter yellow tone here. And the same thing goes for these melons. Everything's in line and flat tone, but how very volumetric it is. And here's this icon painted by a master known as Dionysius. And here again, it's in line and flat tone. There's just the slightest indications of modeling in the flesh parts. Look at this this sail shape of the dark green tunic of the woman here. How that rises up like that, and then we get the forearm moving up like that. And look at this triangle here. How that relates to the large sail shape here, and that goes up behind this icon, which this woman is holding in her hand. And there's this curved shape of the roof over here, as opposed to the rectilinear triangular shape of this roof over here. And notice that it's a little bit higher in the space than this one is. And that that moves our eye around the tower here so that we can really feel the tower as being cylindrical and occupying space. And so that our eye can move around back there and then down with that triangle into the space of this little icon she's holding. And notice, too, how the icon is very close in tone to the wall of the tower here, but it's a little bit darker, and this rectangular form pulls up and away from the wall, so simultaneously it pulls forward in the space. So we can really feel the space between this rectangle she's holding and the wall back there. And then look at the lift in tone from this icon she's holding up to her white headdress here. And here, the priest's garment. There's a parallelism here, more or less. This is a straight line, a somewhat curved line, but between the two of them and the way that they come out from this rectangular doorway, it helps us to feel the volume again of that figure. The placement of the tones on the facets of the architecture, of the steps here, likewise, directs our eye up into this the subdued orange tones of this architecture here, and helps our eye to read around in the space. Now, sometimes Matisse's pictures and the icons are said to be flat because they lack a Vertian perspective, as if space were dependent upon such perspective. Now, this too is obviously an error, as will be made clear by our investigation of the nature of pictorial space. And in this investigation, we will begin with what is obvious and proceed to what is less obvious. Our experience of space in the world is largely kinesthetic, dependent upon the sensation of our body's movement, our feeling of the forces of gravity and equilibrium as we move, and the ever-varying correlation between optical stimuli and eye movements, including binocular convergence, accommodation to focal distances, and parallax. This elementary fact is forgotten by those who think that space is achieved in painting by optical verisimilitude, with its shading of volumes and its atmospheric and linear perspective, approaching the effect of photography. If I may have the next slide on the right, please. An arbitrary snapshot, the epitome of a purely optical impression, gives us a jumble of variously shaped tones removed from their spatial context. From being accustomed to viewing such flat images, whether in photographs or in academic realist paintings, we develop a space blindness. The eye seizes upon recognizable details, and by a conventional sort of leap of credulity, accepts the flat image as referring to things one has experienced in the world. The difference between flatness and space collapses. May I have the next two slides, please? The opposite happens in great paintings. There, our experience of space is heightened. In a masterpiece by Matisse, or by Rembrandt, or Raphael, Giotto, Picasso, Mondrian, for example, a feeling of depth is created by the pushing and pulling of shapes and colors. All the lines and tones are organized at once musically and architectonically in such a way as to give the viewer movement into and out of depth. And this depth is made palpable by the tension between it and the flatness of the pictorial surface. The real experience of space in a painting is not quantitative, dependent upon the suggestion of deep vistas. Rather, it is qualitative, dependent upon the resonance of the tension between the flat plane and all the pushing and pulling planes of color. The difference between flatness and space is not collapsed in painting. It is amplified. In this terrific Cézanne landscape up in the Metropolitan. You see this, this riverbed, which runs in from the lower right and moves back into the space. And you see that the vector of the riverbed here kind of comes up and then rams these trees so that the trees literally kind of fall over that way. And in contrast to these trees pulling over, this tree comes back, kind of pulls back this way. So we get a kind of pushing in here and a pulling out with this tree. And look at this aqueduct back here. It comes in and kind of like punches right past this tree. You see, look at this clump of foliage here. It's kind of like a boxing glove on the end of this long arm of the aqueduct, like pow, like that. And you see, I mean, the connection between the aqueduct and the foliage is so strong that Cézanne didn't bother to paint the branch in here. The aqueduct does the trick, you see. So that punches this way, while this clump of foliage kind of drops down. So 1, 2. And then this whole space back here, you see, the pushing in of that and the pulling out of this from here down like that kind of wrenches open the space, so then this part of the landscape can move back. And so then we have a less contrast up here with Mont Saint-Victoire, and more contrast over here in this side of the painting, which then pulls forward. And the space is truly qualitative here as opposed to quantitative. It's not an illusion of atmospheric perspective or anything like that, but rather it's kind of a wrenching of planes that gives you a visceral feeling of the space. And the same thing happens in this Russian icon of St. George here, where you have the saint here kind of leaning a little bit and is supporting himself in an interesting way. It's not the classical contrapposto of Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. Rather, he kind of digs his sword here into the corner of the icon, and he also finds his cape a convenient shape to lean on, making this very strong diagonal. And look at this. The triangle negative shape here, and then the bigger triangular negative shape here with these parallel diagonals. And this one comes up like that into the red leggings here, and this diagonal comes up like that, and then we get the interesting shapes here, and then gets picked up again with the top of the quiver up here. That arm holding that spear, which is parallel to the edge of the frame, coming down into down to the very edge, right in front of his toes, and. But notice though the kind of with the movement from the triangle, I have a little triangle, I have a bigger triangle, and then I zip up here, and the hand up here with the spear, and then the name here of the saint, and the name kind of has a pressure upon the space. It takes off from this vertical, kind of pushes over, and compresses the space here, which then causes the head to move over like that. And we get again, a kind of a revolving of the halo and of the volume of the head, again, this over-volumed head. And then we come down into the sword lodged in the corner, but then we get the backlash of the form of the bow here, and look at the convexity of the bow opposing the convexity of the halo. So then we come back here, and then down again with the spear. And so the space kind of like, it's kind of seesaws around like that. And you feel like the tension, you can feel it physically, kind of like in your shoulder blades or something, with that kind of, the way he's locked in that space, and the space opens up with this powerful feeling of tension between that up there and this down here, and the whole rocking of space back and forth. May I have the next 2 slides, please? Kandinsky wrote of Matisse, quote, "He paints images. and in these images endeavors to reproduce the divine. To attain this end, he requires as a starting point nothing but the object to be painted, human being or whatever it may be, and then the methods that belong to painting alone, color and form. For Kandinsky, the freeing of art from the imitation of appearances allowed it to revert to its essence of line and pure tone. Matisse, committed to this most universal mode of painting, whose revival in France had been pioneered by Gauguin and Van Gogh, said to Thériault in 1936, quote, "When the means of expression have become so refined, so attenuated, that the power of expression wears thin, it is necessary to return to the essential principles that made human language. These are, after all, the principles that go back, that restore life, that give us life. Pictures that have become refinements, subtle degradations, dissolutions without energy, call for beautiful blues, beautiful reds, beautiful yellows, materials to stir the sensual depths in men. This is the starting point of Fauvism, the courage to return to the purity of the means." In a postcard to Mangin sent from Moscow in 1911, Matisse compared the icons to Fauvist painting. Later in life, reminiscing about his reaction to divisionist theories and rules, Matisse said he had to find a way to compose with the drawing in such a way as to enter directly into the arabesque with the color. He stated that in the Fauvist reaction against the diffusion of local tone and light, quote, "Light is not suppressed, but is expressed by a harmony of intensely colored surfaces." In this icon, we have, look at this, there's the dark green tone of this floor, this ground plane here, and then the way that this brown sits in front of it and rises up above that dark green tone, and then we get the kind of golden brown tones of this part of this costume here, which the vertical kind of this part here kind of rises up like that. Then we get this part swinging up at the diagonal, and then after this kind of this launching up into this the golden brown tone, then we get the swinging open of his omophorion here, and the energy of that form is increased by the ornament of these cross shapes on it. And the whole painting's in the mode of line and flat tone, except for the modeling, the relief modeling in the head, in the hands. And one of the things that this mode of painting allows is abundant use of linear ornament. And the name is part of the linear ornament. You see here the difference, the asymmetry of the two sides of the background, and the way that these letters interact with it. The pressure of this area, the smaller area, pushing again against the halo, and the expansiveness of this area with the somewhat more widely spaced letters up there. In the Matisse, we have the same predilection here for this kind of field of red. And then there's this jostling forward of the red tabletop, kind of separating from the field of red and coming forward, and it's held up, kind of buoyed up by the dark blue, greenish blue in here, and at the same time, we have the confluence of tone from the dark greenish blue of the background into the dark leaves, and then that form coming down into the front of down in front of the tabletop. And so we have this sandwiching effect of planes of color, and the way that sandwiching of planes defines space and gives us a kind of jostling open of the space by a kinesthetic feeling of the relation of the red parallelogram of the tabletop to the red field of the background. It's kind of like a jostling forward, which is kinesthetic and feels like an opening of the space, opening forward. And here in the woman's costume, just as in the icon, there's a field of flat tone animated by these little linear ornaments. And of course, there's an abundance of ornament in the wallpaper and the rug. And with this jostling forward of the table, the woman kind of recoils from that. See the gesture of her arms holding the mandolin? The belief so rampant in the academic art of the 19th century and still surprisingly widespread today that a painter can copy appearances, as also the trust that we put in the camera, a machine, to reproduce the way things look, betrays a tendency to reduce the material world to mere materiality, something which can be considered apart from spirit. When the Latin churches separated from the Christians of the East at the end of the first millennium, they set off on a road of increasing rationalism, gradually losing the mystical vision of the world which the Orthodox in the East retained. And so you find that by the end of the Middle Ages, the religious art of the West starts to look quite different from the icons. Descartes' dualistic philosophy is a significant milestone in the Western trend, but the direction was evident centuries earlier, notably in the medieval scholastics. Descartes can be considered, in a way, a kind of a culmination of this trend, or a kind of a real clinching of the tendency. He held that matter is mere extension, and that spirit only exists in our own minds or in heaven. To the extent that painting was overcome by this notion, it had to deal with the world, its light and its space, externally, mechanistically. That's the reason behind the trend towards academic realism, which became increasingly evident in Europe after the Renaissance, and against which Matisse reacted so strongly. Matisse criticized a kind of painting which he said presented, quote, a void of action. And we'll see what that means a little further on. Now, of course, there were many exceptions to this trend. There's a great deal of painting that was done which deals very much with appearances, but which deals with the mystery of appearances and not with the external copying of appearances. The difference is crucial. If I may have the next slides on both sides, please. A really marvelous example of painting that deals with the mystery of appearances is Van Eyck's Arnolfini wedding portrait. And then there are a number of other examples that come from the Northern Renaissance, like that Bruegel painting of the harvesters up in the Metropolitan Museum, for example. And of course, perhaps if one thinks of a certain evolution in human thought, of human consciousness, one might perhaps suppose that Van Eyck and the other Flemish painters of the Northern Renaissance come at a certain balance between the declining of spiritual consciousness and the rise of scientific consciousness. And they can really get the best of both. Afterwards, it was going to become increasingly problematic. But there are, again, tremendous exceptions. I could talk about the art of Vermeer, of Clara Peters, of Chardin, of Courbet or Ingres, and these painters whose work has tremendous virtue, and everything that I'm going to say about the icons and about Matisse, I could also apply to these great masters. But I'll just take for a moment Van Eyck as an example. Look at the shape of the window here. The configuration of the lights is such that it that it's not static, but it swings in from the left, from the upper left, swings in from the frame, kind of knocks this hand, kind of like knocks it up, and then it's as if the head were kind of like a balloon, and you tap the balloon and it rises up a little bit. So it's risen up like that. And then this wheel of the cog wheel of the mirror kind of tumbles down, and it meets the pressure of this. Look at the red here, how that buoys up, how it supports the hands. And then there's this thing hanging, the beads hanging on the wall, and how they dramatize the spinning of the mirror shape. Look at the move from this red here up to the canopy of the bed. The parallelism of this pendulous form here and the cuff. And then the zigzagging of these forms down here, and the way the configuration of these lines, of these zigzags, determines the space. And then these slippers within this triangle of light sliding up like that. If we look at any detail within the work, we see the tremendous choreographing of shapes. Look at the line of the dark coming up like that against the curve of the thumb shape, the shadow here, and the points of the fingers coming up like that, and the dagger of white coming up here. How marvelously musical those forms are. May I have the next slide on the right, please? Or here. Look at the dark of her hair here, kind of like almost like a horn shape, pulling up like that, and then the way that this dark curves down, meeting, and then there's this triangular pointed form pointing up like that, and then this form coming down a little bit lower and down here. Look at the rhythm of the angles of this blue arm against that one. May I have the next two slides, please? The Orthodox tradition knows no separation between nature and grace, such as prevails in Western thought, in the wake of scholasticism, and which had so much influence upon the development of Western art. In the Eastern view, as expressed from ancient times by Gregory of Nyssa, Maximus the Confessor, and a host of others, matter is thoroughly and dynamically irradiated by the divine energies, apart from which matter would not exist. These energies are uncreated. They are considered to be God himself. By the luminous force of his logoi or thought wills, God creates and orders, sustains and governs all things in an intimate, dynamic relationship with each creature, operating within the creature. This inner life of nature blazes forth as what St. Isaac of Syria calls the flame of things. And Maximus says, the unspeakable and prodigious fire hidden in the essence of things, as in the bush on Mount Sinai, is the fire of divine love and the dazzling brilliance of his beauty inside everything. Icons are above all concerned with this inner life, this luminous force, this fire within creation. And that's why you have such flamboyant forms in the icons. And every form is extremely active. Look at the surging movement of the legs of this horse coming up here. And look at the difference between the back of the horse and the front of the horse. this very much ascending movement here, surging upward. And then we have this horizontal up here in the horse's bridle, and the great curve around like that. The leg lunges up this way, and its impetus is picked up by the head of the horse here. And the curve then of the neck mediates up to the round shape of the shield, whose color picks up on the shape of the leg, which rhymes with the shape of the horse's nose here. And then we get here this tremendous shape of the cape, very active, swinging up like that, and again, kind of almost wanting to lodge in the corner here, and pushing then this arm, holding the spear forward, and then this spear comes down to enter into the mouth of the dragon. And notice how the dragon is connected tonally with the shape of the ground plane and the horizon, but then the spear comes in front of the horse's tail. So it's giving kind of really a compression of the space, which at the same time causes us to feel the space as undergoing a lot of tension as it opens up. And in this still life with oysters, Matisse has a similar feeling of the liveliness, the inner life of all forms. And Matisse used to insist upon this matter of the life of forms, the inner life of things. He even suggested that instead of going to art school, students should spend time in the zoological gardens, where he said they could acquire a sense for life, for the embryonic life and its vibrations, and acquire that fluid which great artists possess. Look at this, the plate of oysters, and how it's inside this larger ring of things. There are oysters outside here, and this oyster, look at the white shape and the dark shape here, which then pushes against that side of it. And then we move over and we have this dark green, this kind of the leaf or whatever it is. Or no, it's not a leaf, it's inside of an oyster shell. And that kind of comes up and pushes against this oyster, and we get this jumble of oysters then pushed against by that and held back by this one here. So we get this kind of little hubbub of oysters here, oyster shells. And we have this lemon coming up and nudging that vase, and then the energy sweeps up through these curving lines, then pops out into these flowers, which rhyme very nicely with the oyster shells. And then this lemon kind of digs in under and behind the plate here and helps to get this whole plate spinning. And as it spins, it moves over this way, you see, and gets kind of bumps against this big thing over here. And look at how nicely the picture holds back here. This earth brownish red picture with the white lights on it, just sufficient to hold it in being. Matisse, like the icon painters, recognizes the need for a certain asceticism, a purification of the power of vision, in order that one may see the light and the life within nature. Raymond Escolier describes how, relaxing in his garden in Nice, Matisse smiled at the crystal clear light. "Everything is new," he said. "Everything is fresh, as if the world had just been born. A flower, a leaf, a pebble, they all shine. They all glisten, lustrous, varnished. You can't imagine how beautiful it is. I sometimes think we desecrate life. From seeing things so much, we don't look at them anymore. Our senses are woolly. We feel nothing. We're spoiled. I think that to really enjoy things, it would be wise to deprive ourselves of them. It is good to begin by renouncing, force oneself from time to time to take a cure of abstention." Matisse's attitude is remarkably close to that of the orthodox ascetics, the ones who paint the icons, who practice renunciation in order that their vision may be purified, enabling them to see things in their truth. And Matisse uses that very same expression, dans sa vérité, seeing things in their truth, and in the fullness of their beauty. Significantly, the classic collection of texts in the Eastern Orthodox Church about prayer and asceticism is called the Philokalia, the love of beauty. Matisse describes the work of a painter as an inner process culminating in the rhythmic and life-filled expression of an internal vision. These are his words. The first step toward creation is to see everything as it really is, dans sa vérité, and that demands a constant effort. A work of art is the climax of a long work of preparation. The artist takes from his surroundings everything that can nourish his internal vision. He enriches himself internally with all the forms he has mastered and which he will one day set to a new rhythm. It is in the expression of this rhythm that the artist's work becomes really creative. To achieve it, he will have to sift rather than accumulate details, selecting, for example, from all possible combinations the line that expresses most and gives life to the drawing. He will have to seek the equivalent terms by which the facts of nature are transposed into art. That is the sense, so it seems to me, he wrote, in which art may be said to imitate nature, namely by the life that the creative worker infuses into the work of art. The work will then appear as fertile and as possessed of the same power to thrill, the same resplendent beauty as we find in works of nature. Great love is needed to achieve this effect, a love capable of inspiring and sustaining that patient striving towards truth, that glowing warmth, and that analytic profundity that accompany the birth of any work of art. But is not love the origin of all creation? The rhythmic quality of lines, tones, and shapes which Matisse insists on is necessary for expressing the vital energy at the heart of existence. The rhythms are perceived in nature by the artist who has purified his vision so as to be able to look at life as he did when he was a child. The artist must interiorize these rhythms until the object of his drawing can become like a part of his being, until he has it within him and can draw its traits not from the outside world, but from deep within, and project it onto the canvas as his own creation. In this sense, the object is set forth in the work of art according to a new rhythm. Matisse's approach is thus similar to that of the icon painters, who must likewise expose themselves at length to that which they want to portray, so that they can draw its traits not from the outside world, but from deep within themselves. The Orthodox tradition of the iconographers holds that one can only see the uncreated light of divinity by being oneself filled with light and transformed into light. And hence the iconographers must be ascetics, purifying their vision. And if they become filled with light, then they can see all things as filled with light. And then they walk in a divine space, the space of the divine kingdom, which is within them. See, it's a space that they walk in, and it's within them. And the space and the light are one, and all things are light, as the piece of fire, a piece of iron held in a fire becomes fire. The icon painter expresses all this from within, presses out a space which is identical with light energy, and which does not recede from us, but rather opens out towards us. The saints who inhabit the space of the icon are all face and all light, to use an expression of Macarius of Egypt. May I have the next two slides, please? If we look at this icon here, St. Nicholas, and look at the omophorion of the saint here, and look at the activity of these crosses. You see, there's a confluence of tone here of the scarf, the omophorion, with the background, and then the cross, which comes down like that, as opposed to this one, which moves up like that. And so there's a kind of a ricocheting off. This horizontal line here comes down and up. And then look at this white shape coming up around this side of his neck as opposed to the contrast of the black shape over here. And so we get a movement up and around his head this way. And there's a very kind of a subtle distortion, if you will, of the head swelling out then towards this side in accordance with the movement of the air around like that. This hand comes up into this rectangular space, and the gesture of the hand then in blessing has a force which is felt, even though it's a quiet and calm gesture, it has a force which is felt in the strength of this rectangular shape, which can cause the ricocheting of those crosses, and also the hand gets magnified in the more intense orange tone of the book, which bounds forward. It moves to the right and bounds forward, pressed forward by the white scarf hanging down behind it, and the tilt of the rectangular volume of the book forward like that. And then also the movement this way is in accordance with the general circulation of the air around this way. Let's have the next two slides, please. Look at this icon of King David, this Novgorod icon of King David, with the those cheeks, pressing in. This reminds me of something that I forget his name, but a French philosopher wrote an essay about the power of silence in the human face, and he said that the cheeks are like walls pressing in against silence. But the strength of silence is seen in the violence of the force of the shape of the nose. And I love the way that these forms of the cheeks press inward, and then we get the nose with its vertical force and then sprouting these supraorbital ridges here. And then how that movement moves right into the curling rhythms of the hair. And then we have the chunks of gold leaf to this side and that side, pushing in against the convexities of those jowls here. And then there's such a tension here of this against this, and the pressure has to be somewhere, so it sprouts that crown up there. And there's this marvelous portrait of Matisse's daughter Marguerite, which is up in the Met. Very seldom hanging, unfortunately. But look at the treatment of the volumes here, with the hair, the kind of the pendulous form of the hair coming down here, and this form of the hair curling up like that. And we have this, the contour of the head coming in here. Now, of course, it's the hair, it's the curl of the hair coming in. But look how nicely it swells out the volume here. And then in opposition, we get the intenser, the darker yellow of the bow pulling up like that, and then dropping down to this, the brooch here. So there's this up here, and then that down there. And the horizontal force of those lips, how they sit nicely in the space, giving us a feeling of pressure this way and that way. And look at the rise. Look at how, as we come up this way, this eye is higher than that one. And we get a nice journey from the bottom of the nose over and up into that eye. In a testimonial of 1951, Matisse tells of how, in the chapel at Vence, he wanted to do the same thing he had always done in his canvases. Quote, "In a very restricted space, the width is 5 meters, I wanted to inscribe a spiritual space, as I had done so far in paintings of 50 centimeters or 1 meter. That is, a space whose dimensions are not limited even by the existence of the objects represented." Interesting phrase. A space whose dimensions are not limited even by the existence of the objects represented. And that harks back to something I quoted earlier when I talked about how Matisse said that one must learn to look at life with the eyes of a child, drawing one's strength from the existence of objects. Well, right after he said that, Matisse said, not letting one's imagination be cut off by the existence of objects. You see, so there's a sense in which you can look at things and have your imagination cut off by the existence of objects, and there's a sense in which you can look at things and have and experience their existence, their act of being, and draw strength from that. This spiritual space that Matisse is talking about is a kind of plenitude that is truly felt. It's plastic, in other words, that truly felt. It does not imitate some externally perceived space, and it is achieved through color which laid on in flat planes provokes light as one uses harmonies in music. Quote, "Color helps to express light, not the physical phenomenon, but the only light that really exists, that in the artist's brain. Most painters," he said, "require direct contact with objects in order to feel that they exist, and they can only reproduce them under strictly physical conditions. They look for an exterior light to illuminate them internally. Whereas the artist or the poet possesses an interior light which transforms objects to make a new world of them, sensitive organized, a living world which is in itself an infallible sign of divinity, a reflection of divinity. Now, because the light-filled space that the artist finds within himself reflects the divine, it brings with it a communion with nature and gives birth to art which is true to nature. And again, quoting Matisse, awakened and supported by the divine, all elements will find themselves in nature. Let's have the next 2 slides, please. I love this red interior here with the red field, again, kind of pushing forward the blue table, and the blue table jostles the lower left corner of the painting, and it pops these red tomatoes to the fore. And as it does so, the table rotates counterclockwise. As it rotates counterclockwise, you get the amoeboid form of the napkin swimming over to that side. As you get the rise of this contour here, it pushes the vase, causing the vase to kind of lose its balance. And also, at the same time, it flattens this side of the vase a little bit and causes this side to bulge. And as a reaction to that, then the flowers kind of come up and over like that. And the oval form of the table is echoed in the circular medallion with the woman's profile in it up here. And from the gold of the medallion, we move over to this open door. Now notice that the door doesn't quite identify with the right edge of the painting, but the top of it leans a little bit over in and initiating a return movement, which comes down, back over to the medallion, and then down to the table. So we get again, a counterclockwise movement of the whole space, which amplifies the spinning of the movement of the table. But then a counterpoint to that, we have the movement of the red and black zigzags moving up like that, and then we have the yellow flowers outside, which echo and amplify the movement of the flowers in the vase inside, and at the same time giving a little nudge to this the yellow table out here. In this icon of St. Demetrius, we have this, look at the cross he's holding here, and how that's the opposite of the sword here. See? The arm here, the arm down there. So this goes up and that goes down, and we have then, look at this, the black thing here. How there's this black shape behind his hand on the cross, and that swoops around like this. And just as the arm, so the arm comes around here, this pulls around like that, and look at this, the black, like the collar thing, the inside of, I don't know what that is, the shirt or something. And you see how this triangular thing comes down, and he doesn't bring the point down below it, you see, but he cuts it off so that it seems to be almost as if, almost as if it were caught on the arm of the cross and starts to pull around this way. See? And then we get this movement of the space around like that, and a very similar then, a similar deformation of the head, just like the vase here in the Matisse. We get the spinning, which causes this side of the head to be enlarged as it comes around. And then, of course, we have the echoing of the halo in the round form of the shield. Now, if we look longer at this red interior with the blue table in it by Matisse, if you spend a lot of time with it, you get to really experience how the light in the painting is a radiant encounter of fields of color, ceaselessly enriched by the ebb and flow of all the powerful and subtle exchanges that go on among the pictorial elements. There's no suggestion of incident illumination, just as there's really very little suggestion at all of incident illumination in the icon. And the ample space of the painting makes no allusion to perspective. I'd say that this painting is a very good example of what Matisse was talking about when he said that interior light is necessary to transform objects and to make a new world of them, sensitive, organized, a living world, which is a reflection of divinity, as he put it. The painting unfolds rhythmically as an organic whole in space and in time, or rather, to speak more accurately, the space and time are born from this unfolding. The painting is alive and active, magnifying the energy which fills nature. The organic unfolding of all the elements within the painting is continuous with an unfolding of the painting towards the viewer. And this is the painting's splendor, its clarity or radiance. The plenitude of being which fills the work expands and radiates to illumine a viewer standing at a distance of, say, 30 feet, 50, or 100 feet. The painting is not limited by the dimensions of its frame. Inferior paintings do not do this. You go to a museum and you can see certain paintings that they might be very large, but you back up a few yards and they just become a jumble, like billboards. But you can look at a little tiny painting, like the Van Eyck Arnolfini wedding portrait I showed you earlier. It's a little tiny painting, but you can stand several rooms back from it in the National Gallery in London, and the painting is still clear. It illumines you, standing at a distance. The painting is not limited by the dimensions of its frame. This expansiveness is a function of the mysterious reality of the picture plane. When all of the pictorial elements, the lines, the shapes, and the colors are interrelated in a dynamic and harmonic space-time equilibrium, the painting exercises a luminous presence which faces the viewer. The painting is all light and all face. Here we see the co-inherence of light and space and the picture plane. They are one reality. And that reality is an event of transformation, which for Matisse, as for the icon painters, manifests the divine. Let's have the next two slides, please. Well, here we see a painting by Matisse in progress. And this is so characteristic of his method of working. How often he began with a rather oblique space and gradually made his way around to a more of a frontal space in which the quantitative nature of the space is minimized and the qualitative nature is correspondingly enhanced, somewhat in the direction of what Mondrian was to do later on. Well, perhaps not really later on, actually. Look at the dates. The next slide, let's look at the next, over on this side, because there's more on the left. Yeah, so here's some more stages of it further on. And now let's have the next two slides, please. Here, look at this, how the tray with the breakfast on it is how it's held up by these red and white stripes here. And we get this, the movement of the cup and the saucer and the napkins, and how this coming over like this gives a little push to the whole tray. So the dark form moves over this way, and you get that nice spout pointing in like that. And we have the spinning movement of the mirror up here. See how this side pulls up here as this side comes down, and we get the flowing of the tone of the flowers up there into the handle. It's not moving that way. Yeah. And then look at the, and this comes up and holds that, the force then helps to keep this picture held up there in the space. We get the gray coming down into this vase. And look at how the golden rotation of this is picked up on in the arm, in the chair here. And the antimacassar here, thrown over the chair, echoes the toe, echoes the circular form, the oval form of the mirror and of the tray, but also picks up on this white, but moves back in tone, being somewhat grayer, and gives us a nice look at the circular design on it. Feeds right into the woman's gesture with that arm coming down and this arm looping up then to support the head. She leans into this gray tone, which also happens to be the floor, which is down there and back. And also she leans back this way, and her head is nicely kind of cradled by this background shape of this the door or whatever it is, with with these rectangles in it. And you see how that kind of holds her head up. See, and then we have this. The hanging back here, the curtain or whatever it is. And that's pretty far back there in the space. relative to this activity here. Now, while all of this is going on, moving our eyes back there in the space, this rectangular tabletop barges in like that, and then we can read these. We can kind of feel the collision here in terms of the dropping down of the arm and going over, moving down like here, and so you see, there's this kind of a paroxysm of the space, because it moves, it wants to move back like that into the distance, but then this wants to connect with the woman's head, and so we feel a certain relation here, and this comes in and kind of like smacks it and causes the whole thing to jostles the whole thing and causes a kind of a paroxysm, explosion of energy which comes out towards us. And I love this icon here with this burial of the saint, where you have these black shapes, the black shape of the door of the church here, the dark shapes here in the costumes, and how this lid of the coffin here is placed between the two, how it cuts across the dark rectangle of the door and kind of swings back so it just touches the staff that this character is holding here, and how that white figure is sandwiched between them. This foreground shapes and the dark shapes here, and so that we feel the kind of the turning in space of the coffin lid as in relationship to these shapes that are in the crowd of the figures. And then we get the heads leaning over this way, and the 1, 2, 3, the increasing size of the arched windows, and then going back to these windows, and then moving down into the dark heads here, and then over to the book, down into this part of the costume. And there's this same kind of paroxysm happening in the space because of the way that this relates to the black here and pushes back against this activity, and then the space swings around from that. Let's examine a little further, as we're finishing up now, this mysterious event which we call the picture plane. It can't be taken for granted. The picture plane is not something that you start out with and have the option of preserving or not. Rather, it's something that has to be achieved, and its achievement is simultaneous with the creation of pictorial light and pictorial space. Because together, the picture plane and light and space constitute a single reality, and that reality is a single event. It's a spiritual event. And also the color, pictorial color, is part of this. Pictorial color is achieved at the same time as the picture plane and light and space. And that's why André Durand said that color in painting, it doesn't come from the prism. It is, he said, a spiritual matter of inner life manifested by rhythm. Durand further observed that light in painting is not a principle of imitation like illumination. Its purpose is not to illuminate objects, but to set the painting within its frame. In other words, light serves to generate the picture plane. In a living painting, born from these, in a living painting, which you have this rhythmic unfolding of the lines and the shapes and the colors, this rhythmic unfolding results in what Durand called the paroxysm, the same word which I've used already. And the paroxysm is simultaneously the opening up of space and the breaking forth of radiance, of spiritual light, of real pictorial color. The paroxysm is thus tantamount to the picture plane, the event which we call the picture plane, so that you can use the words as synonyms. The paroxysm is the picture plane. It's another word for it. We see now that the picture plane is transcendent in its very essence, and that's why it's so mysterious and hard to grasp. It only exists in an act by which it transcends itself. An infinity of pictorial space exists when and only when the picture plane exists. And that's why in great painting, the difference between flatness and space is not collapsed, but rather amplified and reconciled. And this simultaneous amplification and reconciliation of flatness and space explains why, when the picture plane exists, the surface on which the picture is painted feels right. It feels right, it breathes the air of infinity. It doesn't feel limited in any way. And the surface on which it's painted doesn't have to be a rectangle, it doesn't have to be flat. Because the picture plane is not to be identified with the flatness of the surface, with the rectangle you start out with or whatever. The picture plane is just something that comes from the mysterious interplay of these forces. It's kind of a felt tension. It's the way that the painting has of facing you. It's this opening out, this radiating forth of the life that fills the painting. I have just maybe a couple more slides to show you, but I don't want to run too long. So let's just see run through the next few slides, and I'll see whether I want to stop and talk about any of them. Okay? Here, I think these are two very clear examples. There's this Romanian icon on the right and this Matisse on the left. And look at this, how the blue of the background with its vertical stripes comes around into the blue of her dress. And we get the red here, which sits down here underneath her and to the left. And then this red here, which moves around into the background, and she leans into it. Of course, it's back behind her. It's back behind this plant stand. But she can nevertheless lean into it visually. And look at this, the gold here, how that sweeps up, leads her eye around, helps to determine the flow of the space. We get the pretzel movement of the arm here of the chair, completed by her arm here, up like that, and how the gold of her shawl picks up just the right intensity from the yellow of the chair. And then how we get the creamier color of the guitar falling down like that, and the lift up into the more delicate tones of her flesh. Or this saint over here with the blue of the background, and notice how it comes down just below the level of his bent arms there. And we get the big negative shape here with the red with the cape showing through against the smaller area here, how that balances the placement of the cape on the shoulders, and the way that this blue then kind of like holds up, helps to support his gesture, and pulls up so that we feel then the elongation of the body coming down from that, and the balancing of the sash against this curve of the hat. And very interestingly, look at this line here in the neck. It's like the cord of a salad spinner. You kind of pull it, give it a yank, and it causes the whole thing, causes the whole head to spin around like that. Let's hit the next two, please. Okay. I think this one is very, very clear, so I'll refrain from talking about it. Well, I'll just talk about it a little bit. They have this white of the church coming down, and look at this, the little baby here holding the swaddling clothes. How that white pulls away from it. You get the confluence of tone in the midwife's kerchief here, and then come down into the white here. The way that this red of the washing basin holds against the red of the bed here. The movement up into the tower here. And then pulling over into the red roof. And then dropping down into the way that this figure glides across the top of the bed. And the way that this black roof then pulls away from it. So this pulls up like that as this swings down like that. And then look at the way that this figure is held back in that space, and give it just the right amount of contrast up there in the head. And my last slide over here on the right, next one please, this terrific Matisse. And look at the look at this picture up here in the upper left. With it's not perfectly rectangular, It has this contour, pulls, swings up like that, and the whole thing tends to want to be on its way up into the upper left-hand corner, like it wants to fly away. And the contours of the head drawn on it help to move it in that direction. And it's held in tension with the blue cup and saucer down here, and notice that the saucer has its own agenda here, how it wants to, see how it swings over in that direction. We get the nice lifting up into the handle here, and then the top of it, the oval opening here, swinging, moving over in that direction. The handle of the pitcher pulling up, the rotation of the leaves and so forth up here. And look at this, the red flowers, kind of like a hand almost, reaching around and really kind of like giving us a real tangible feeling, almost as if you had your hand around that picture. And look at the relation between these fruits here, oh, so quietly pulling away from the ochre tabletop and held in being, as it were, by the whiteness of the plate on which they're resting. So quietly they differentiate themselves from the tabletop, but they have the white plays a great supporting role. And look at how this fruit quietly scuttles over this way, and gives us, and then we have the nice, beautiful activity of these leaves. Matisse's joyful knowledge of nature is a unitive knowledge, and in its depth, it may be compared to conjugal knowledge. The joy of this lives on in the event of the painting, in the event of the picture plane, in the paroxysm which is ceaselessly renewed by the work's rhythms. And in this context, I should also add that the joyful light and space of the Orthodox icon are the light and space of a nuptial union in the theology of the icon. It's a nuptial union, a marriage feast, the feast of the 8th day of creation, in which sees the fulfillment of God's espousal of his creation, now healed, renewed, and transformed. And it's for that reason that the icons are considered as being agents of inner spiritual healing. And for the very same reason, Matisse had the same feeling for this longing for this joyful restoration of all things. And that's why it was so important for him to make art that would have a therapeutic effect. The communion with nature, the participation in the divine, which are implicit in pictorial light and space, cannot fail to have a healing effect. The act of the painting, the event of the painting, the act of transcendence which constitutes the picture plane, the opening out of inner life and light, is itself already an event of transformation. I'll leave you with a little anecdote which Pierre Schneider recounts concerning Sergei Shukin, the collector, at whose invitation Matisse went to Russia in the first place in 1911. After his wife's death, Shukin made a pilgrimage to Athos, the holy mountain, and there he was particularly struck by the ascetic striving of a young monk he met there. And later on, he was shown the monk's cell. And there, among the icons which normally adorn the walls of a monk's cell, was a reproduction of a painting by Henri Matisse. I thank you all for your time and attention this evening, and I'd be happy to address any questions. Yes? Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Question? Yeah.
We were talking about photography and how it affects our vision. Do you think that puts artists in visual photography that we see all the time?
Yes, and Matisse talked about that. He talked about how seeing photographs so much and how it tends to prejudice our vision. It makes it more difficult to require that the simplicity of vision of children. And perhaps that's part of the reason why you have the great painters of the Northern Renaissance like Van Eyck and Bruegel, and then later on you have, of course, Vermeer and Chardin and others, Ingres, Courbet, painters who probed the mystery of appearances in a really miraculous manner and gave birth to paintings which have all the virtues of Matisse's paintings and of the icons. But it seems to get rarer and rarer as time goes on. It gets more difficult because you have Duran doing it in the 20th century. But the general approach of the modern masters is more apophatic. I'm using a term which is used by in the theology of the Eastern icons, that an apophaticism is a way of unknowing, that you realize that you can't know it directly, so you have to proceed by way of unknowing. And the sheer impossibility of really painting things the way they look becomes a drive towards a certain apophaticism in Matisse. So you have Matisse wrote in a notebook, which he began in 1946, he wrote the sentence, "Retain only what cannot be seen." See? So his approach to painting is very different from that of Van Eyck. And I think that the increasing mechanization of vision, the fact that we come to the trust of we assume that photographs show us the way things really look, which isn't true. I mean, of course, you look with two eyes and you're constantly scanning and so forth, and the camera is fixed. And there's a multitude of reasons why photography does not in itself show you the way things really look. Of course, there are masterful photographers, and as Graham mentioned at the beginning, I just wrote an essay about one of them. But it is very difficult. And remember that pretty early in Matisse's career, he talked about how he wanted to make art that was like an easy armchair that one can relax in, especially the mental worker can relax in at the end of the day. This is referring to that therapeutic role of art. And of course, that statement is very easily misunderstood. And about 2.5 decades later, Matisse returned to that statement and explained that that modern art is especially valuable in this regard because art, academic realism presents a void of action. See, it doesn't capture the inner life of nature. So you go and you sit down in front of a piece of rendering that's academic, and it doesn't act. So it doesn't have that energy. It doesn't have that restorative energy. Whereas modern painting, according to Matisse, when you look at modern painting and you find your own activity on a higher level, you find your own life, you find it on a higher level, and it lifts you up and re-energizes you. So, yes?
I was just wondering if there's evidence that Matisse's enthusiasm for these Russian icons continued in the latter phases of his life. I mean, does he talk about them in his journals?
Well, yeah, from time to time he mentions them, and after his death, postcards of the interior, photographs of the interior of Hagia Sophia were found pinned to the wall of his studio in Nice. And also, there was a revival of traditional icon painting It happened in Paris, towards the middle, in the first half of this century. Some young Russian painters, Gregory Krug and Leonid Uspensky, chief among them, decided to revive traditional icon painting, and they were encouraged by Matisse. Matisse took a lively interest in their work. So I would say yes, that this interest did continue. Although once again, my main interest is not in the influence, but in the convergence. Yes.
There were certain rules to icon painting. How much, in other words, certain prescribed ways of doing certain things, proportions and compositions. And these Russian icons, are they less dictated by that than, let's say, the earlier Byzantine periods?
Oh, I don't know if they're less dictated by that, but the rules really aren't terribly stringent. They leave a great deal of leeway, and they're actually quite liberating in a way, because the subject, you don't have to worry about subject matter, because it's pretty much set, and the symbolism is set, and so they're really quite free to devote all of their energies to formal exploration. And of course the subject matter remains important, but it's not something that they have to grope for and try to justify to themselves while they're working. Yes?
I was wondering about the pattern, the use of pattern in Matisse and in the Russian icons in terms of color. And in either case, do you think it's sort of metaphor for also for being color? I mean, in some cases it's often really high contrast, and so it could be sort of a metaphor for also that issue of light and color.
Yes, well, see, pictorial color is a matter of forces. You don't have color just because you have a red and a green and a purple and a yellow, but the tones that you use, that you do use, whether they be red and green and blue and orange, or whether they be simply black and white, have to transcend their nature, have to transcend their simple hue identity and become forces. And when it's on a whole different level. And when they become forces in the interaction of all the planes, forces in terms of an arabesque, opening up the space and making this kind of organic rhythm that opens out, that unfolds within the painting, that then becomes continuous with an unfolding of the painting towards the viewer, that then you experience this radiance and this clarity, and then that is pictorial color. And so yes, when you have these high contrast ornaments, like the black crosses on the white liturgical garments, the energy that's set up by the rhythmic deployment of the crosses in the particularly shaped field that you have will give a certain character of expansion to the shape, which then becomes an active force, which is indeed color. See? And of course, the same thing happens in Matisse. It's very apparent in Matisse's black and white work, in his drawings and in his prints, where there's this tremendous richness of color achieved just by black and white. Yes?
With the exception of pieces like the larger boards in an iconostasis, the icons generally have a scale of 8 by 10, 12 by 14, and that's a different scale from the easel painting scale as Matisse is working. How have you included this kind of impression in part of what you're saying?
Yes, I think that the scale, scale is a relative thing, and the plenitude of being in a work of art is, it's not completely independent of the scale, because the way that you feel the plenitude of the being as you're creating the work will be different depending on whether you're working on a small scale or on a big scale, and that's why Matisse, for instance, would always do his preliminary studies on the same size, the same scale as the final work was to be. He wouldn't just do a small drawing and then square it up. But on the other hand, a little tiny painting, like the Arnolfini wedding portrait of Van Eyck, has such an expansiveness to it that it has a more bigness to it than any billboard I've ever seen. It's like in music. You can have let's say a Mozart flute sonata, that's played very quietly, but it has a radiance, a splendor to it, which I would say is an exact analog to the expansiveness of the picture plane when the picture plane is achieved in painting, so that there's a bigness to the sound of the flute playing. Whereas on the other hand, you could have somebody making all kinds of noise and amplifying it with a room full of equipment, and it's still small. You see, and because that happens visually. Like how often are you driving down the highway and you see billboards and you can't even tell what they represent until you're right under them, because they think that if you just make an image big, you have bigness, but it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, I think in icons and you were touching on it before, there's a kind of tenderness to the space and the image, which is really a stage in the existence of the object as a meditative tool. That when you look into this world that is the divine world and you focus into it, it can expand at that point. And I wonder if some of the confluence, the parallels you're drawing between the work of Matisse's painting and the work in the icons hasn't really achieved a similar stage in one level, but that the goals diverge in many ways because the icons seem to speak about and have other purposes than the comfort that Matisse is talking about.
Well, there are indeed differences between icons and Matisse's paintings. Matisse's paintings are not icons, but that's a whole different subject, really, and it has to do with the liturgical theology of the Eastern Church that produces the icons. When Matisse talked quite a bit about the relationship between easel painting and mural painting, and he talks about how in easel painting there is a more direct one-on-one correspondence between the viewer and the work, and that same difference is recognized in Eastern churches, where you have the wall murals, which are supposed to really cover the entire interior surface of the building, all the walls and the ceiling as well, and then you have these icons on boards that are portable, and that one interacts with them one at a time. You go up and you spend time with them individually. You kind of line up and you go up and then you gaze on it and venerate it. So I think it is analogous to Matisse's ideas about easel painting and mural painting. Yes.
You mentioned numerous times in your talk, you quoted Matisse a few times about his belief in the objects he was looking at and the experiences he took from that. Assuming that the icons and Matisse's work have the same quality of plastic balance and movement, what were the iconographers looking at?
Well, they had to study earlier. They would normally study earlier icons, but really they're supposed to. It's an interior vision that they're looking at. You're not supposed to paint icons unless you have an interior vision.